Inside the most dangerous inmate rivalry in U.S. prison history, the shocking truth exposed. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now before this story pulls you in deeper than you can handle. The alarms were still echoing through Corcoran State Prison when Sergeant Lena Cortez reached the entrance of Facility 4A. Officers stood in a tight formation outside the tier, radios crackling with short, clipped updates. The air smelled like cold concrete and adrenaline. Something serious had happened, and everyone could feel it. 2 inmates had been pulled from the yard just minutes earlier, both refusing orders, both staring at each other across the grass with a quiet intensity that terrified even the senior officers. They weren't shouting. They weren't pacing. They were simply watching each other, the way rival generals might before a battle. Their names were Marcus Hale and Raymond Razor Dunn, 2 men whose rivalry had transformed Corcoran into a pressure cooker during the early 1990s. Their feud wasn't loud or chaotic. It was strategic, calculated, and unpredictable. And today, something had shifted. Cortez looked through the reinforced glass window. Hale sat on a bench at the far end of the holding cage, hands clasped, expression unreadable. Across the room, Razor leaned against the wall, eyes narrowed, perfectly still. They didn't speak. They didn't acknowledge anyone but each other. And that silence was more dangerous than anything else. Hours earlier, officers had found an anonymous note in the day room, a torn scrap of legal paper with one line written in shaky handwriting. "It starts today." There was no signature, no initials, nothing to identify who wrote it. But the timing sent chills down every spine. 4 months, the administration had tried to keep Hale and Razor separated after multiple documented confrontations. They were placed in different units, different yard schedules, different programming lines. And yet, somehow, their rivalry continued to bleed into every corner of the institution. Cortez stepped inside the holding area. "Marcus, talk to me. What happened out there?" Hale didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed locked on Razor, as if breaking eye contact would be a mistake. Finally, he muttered, "Ask him." Razor pushed away from the wall. "Ask me what?" He knows exactly what he did. Cortez felt tension tighten across her shoulders. "Enough. Nobody's accusing anyone. We just need to understand what led to this." But neither man seemed to care about her authority. Their focus was entirely on each other, a silent conversation thick with years of unresolved conflict. The rivalry had begun long before either man arrived at Corcoran. It stretched back to earlier facilities, earlier incidents, earlier alliances that were complicated enough to make administrators uneasy. Their feud wasn't just personal. It symbolized a much larger divide inside California's maximum security system. Territorial lines, old loyalties, old grudges, and rumors of a disagreement that had turned into something deeper, something neither side would talk about publicly. Cortez turned to Officer Delgado. "Search the yard again. Look for anything out of place." Delgado nodded and rushed off. While she waited for his return, Cortez studied the 2 men. Hale's breathing was steady, his posture controlled. Razor's expression was colder, as if he knew something no one else did. The entire room felt like a fuse waiting to be lit. Minutes later, Delgado returned with an evidence bag. Inside it was another torn piece of paper. This one had a name on it. Not Hale's. Not Razor's. Cortez froze. The name belonged to an inmate no longer housed at Corcoran, someone transferred months ago after a serious incident involving both rivals. The reappearance of his name raised a question no one was prepared to answer. Cortez showed the note to both men. Hale's jaw tightened. Razor exhaled sharply, as if confirming a suspicion he'd kept hidden. "What does this mean?" Cortez. For the first time since being separated, Hale and Razor broke their silent stare. They both looked at the note. And then, incredibly, both men turned to her at the exact same moment. Razor said it first. "You're not dealing with just us anymore." Hale nodded slowly. "Someone else is pulling the strings." Cortez felt the ground shift beneath her, figuratively, yet unmistakably. She had stepped into something far more complicated than a rivalry between 2 inmates. This wasn't just history resurfacing. This was coordination. A plan. A setup. But before she could ask another question, Razor spoke again. "Check the transfer logs," he said. "You'll see what started all this." Cortez didn't understand. Not yet. But when they opened the file room later that night and pulled the transfer records, what they found changed everything. They pulled the transfer logs from a steel filing cabinet in a room that smelled like dust and old toner. Rows of beige folders lined the shelves, labeled with years and facility codes, evidence of thousands of movements, decisions, and quiet administrative choices. On paper, it all looked orderly. Controlled. Sergeant Lena Cortez knew better. "Here," the records clerk said, sliding a stack of manila files onto the table. "These are all transfers involving Hale and Dunn, plus anyone housed with them prior to Corcoran." Cortez flipped through the pages, her eyes moving over dates and inmate numbers, cross-referencing units and yard designations. Everything looked normal until she saw a name that made her stop. Luis Ortega. She recognized it immediately. Ortega was the inmate whose name had been written on the second note found on the yard. Months ago, he'd been transferred out after what the report described as a serious incident involving multiple inmates. The official narrative claimed it was an isolated confrontation, swiftly contained. No long-term impact. No ongoing threat. But the logs told a different story. Ortega's name appeared again and again. Housed with Hale at one facility. Programmed with Razor at another. Slotted into the same tiers, the same yards, the same lineups. 3 men, rotated through California's maximum security system like pieces on a board. Someone had been placing them together on purpose. Cortez felt a chill slide under her skin. "Who handled these transfers?" she asked. The clerk frowned. "Different administrators over the years. But there is one consistent signature on the movement approvals here." He tapped the corner of the page. This staff ID shows up on the final sign-off line more than once. The initials were small, almost hidden in the scrawl of bureaucratic language. "Jr. Do we have a name for that ID?" Cortez asked. The clerk hesitated. "I'll have to check the older rosters. Some of these are from years back." She nodded, but her mind was already racing. Ortega wasn't just an old name from Hale and Razor's past. He was central to it. Every time tension flared, a change of housing or a transfer seemed to follow, not to defuse the situation, but to move it. To aim it. Back in the holding area, Hale and Razor remained separated, each watched closely. Yet even from a distance, Cortez could tell their energy had shifted. Less raw hostility. Something more controlled. As if a new understanding had passed between them in that small, silent room. She stepped into Hale's side first. "You said to check the transfer logs," she began. "We did. Ortega's name is all over them. So here's your chance. What really happened back then?" Hale stared at the floor for a long moment. "You read the incident report?" "Yes." "Then you know it's a lie," he said. The official narrative claimed Ortega had instigated a confrontation, and Hale and Razor were on opposite sides of it. Afterward, the rivals were separated, and Ortega was moved out. The paperwork framed it as the final break in an unstable triangle. "What's the real version?" Cortez asked quietly. Hale's jaw tightened. "The real version is that Ortega wasn't anyone's victim. He was the one talking to staff. Playing both sides. Giving information to whoever kept him comfortable. When things went bad, no one wanted that on record. So they rewrote the story. Put it on us. Then they moved him somewhere off the radar." Cortez felt the timeline twisting in her head. "So he was an informant?" "Call it what you want," Hale said. "All I know is he always landed on his feet. Better cells. Better jobs. Better deals. Guys like that don't disappear on their own." She left him and crossed into Razor's side. He was already watching her. "You found Ortega, didn't you?" "We found his name," Cortez said. "Everywhere." Razor nodded once. "There you go." "Why didn't either of you say this earlier?" she asked. "You've both had years of opportunities to speak up." Razor met her eyes without flinching. "Because nobody in this place wants to hear that their own system groomed a man like Ortega. Easier to say it's gang drama, yard politics, old grudges. That story fits better in a report." Outside the cage, Delgado appeared at the door, his expression tight. "Sergeant, you need to hear this." In the corridor, his voice dropped to a whisper. "We ran Ortega through the statewide system. He's not listed at any current facility. But he's not marked as released either. His file just stops 2 years ago." "That's not possible," Cortez said. "It gets worse," Delgado added. "I checked an internal movement roster from last month. There's a temporary bed assignment in our own administrative segregation unit with his number on it. It was erased. Someone overwrote it, but the trace is still in the system." Cortez felt the air leave her lungs for a moment. "Are you telling me Ortega was here at Corcoran last month?" Delgado nodded. "For at least 3 days. No official entry. No exit paperwork. Just a ghost record." The note flashed across her memory. "It starts today." She returned to the holding area, heart pounding faster now for reasons that had nothing to do with alarms or lockdown drills. Hale and Razor both looked up as she entered, waiting. "Ortega was here recently," she said. "In this facility. In this building. And someone tried to erase it." For the first time, Razor's composure cracked. A tiny flicker of something, not fear exactly, but recognition. "Then you're already late," he said. "Late for what?" Cortez demanded. Hale's answer was quiet, but it landed like metal on concrete. "For understanding that this rivalry was never just between us." He leaned forward, eyes steady. "Check the staff logs for who had access to that ADSEG unit last month. You'll find your answer." Cortez turned to leave, but an officer intercepted her at the door, breathless. "Sergeant, we've got a problem. There's been a request filed just now to move Hale and Dunn back into the same yard rotation." "Who filed it?" she asked. The officer swallowed. "The signed? Sure." Cortez froze, the transfer logs still open in her mind. Because whoever JR was, they weren't hiding in the past. They were here, now, trying to bring Hale and Razor back together again. The request to reunite Hale and Razor hit Cortez harder than any alarm ever had. It wasn't just reckless. It was intentional. Purposeful. Whoever JR was, they wanted the two most dangerous rivals in California's prison system standing on the same patch of concrete again, and they wanted it to happen now. She stormed into the administrative office with Delgado close behind. Paperwork was scattered across the desk, along with a fresh transfer routing slip bearing the initials she now recognized all too well. "JR. Run the staff roster again," Cortez ordered. "Search every department. I want to know who those initials belong to. If it's a current employee, former employee, contractor, I don't care, run it." Delgado typed rapidly, the blue glow of the monitor casting sharp shadows across his face. The system processed dozens of entries, hundreds of archival records, until finally, a name appeared. James Ruddell. Cortez felt a jolt of recognition. Ruddell was a former associate warden who'd left Corcoran during the height of the 1990s oversight investigations, a time when the institution was under intense scrutiny. His departure had come suddenly, with no public explanation. Rumors whispered of disagreements, disputes, and operations that had been shut down before they were exposed. But he hadn't been officially connected to the Hale-Razor rivalry. Not until now. Delgado scrolled further. There's more. His credentials were flagged, but never fully deactivated. Cortez stared at the screen in disbelief. "You're telling me a former administrator still has access to modify inmate movement orders?" "Only at the back-end level," Delgado said, "which means someone either reinstated his access or never removed it." That meant one thing. Someone inside the system was helping him. She opened the file storage on her screen, pulling up Ortega's ghost record. 3 days in administrative segregation. No listed movement. No listed purpose. No listed escorting officer. But one name appeared in the digital stamp logs each time the file had been opened. JR. Ortega hadn't reappeared on accident. He'd been brought back. And hidden. Suddenly, a realization washed through her, something Hale had said earlier, we weren't the ones who started it. If Ortega had been placed between Hale and Razor for years, moved from facility to facility like a quiet wedge, then someone had deliberately kept the rivalry alive. Not to stop violence, but to manage it, to weaponize it. She turned back to Delgado. "We need to check ADSEG. Now." They sprinted down the corridor, past units that hummed with evening tension. The guards at the ADSEG entrance waved them through, confused by the urgency. "What are we looking for?" one officer asked. "Anything that doesn't belong," Cortez said. The hallway lights flickered as they reached the last row of cells. She scanned each door, each slot, until a nameplate made her stop in her tracks. Cell 117. The plate was blank, but the electronic panel beneath it wasn't. It showed a number. Ortega's number. Her pulse surged. "Open it." The officer checked the log. "It's empty. No assigned housing." "Open it," she repeated. The door slid with a heavy mechanical groan. Inside was nothing. No bedding, no personal property, not even a mattress. Just a bare concrete cell with scuff marks on the floor and dust settling in corners that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Nothing except a folded sheet of paper near the back wall. Cortez approached slowly, lifted it carefully with gloved hands, and unfolded it. The note was short, precise. "It ends when they meet." There was no signature, but she knew who wrote it. She checked the back of the paper. A second line, almost invisible, had been etched faintly into the fibers, as if printed by a pen that had run out of ink. "He's already here." Cortez felt the room tighten around her. "Check the cameras," she said. Delgado radioed the control room, and within seconds, the feed switched to the yard where Hale and Razor were never supposed to stand again. Only now, there was movement. A third figure walked between two officers, escorted, head down, face obscured by a hooded state-issued jacket. A figure with Ortega's build. "Who cleared that escort?" Cortez shouted into her radio. Static crackled. Then a voice came through. "Transfer approved by JR." Her blood ran cold. "Stop them," she yelled. "Do not bring him into that yard." But the radio cut out, dead silence. She stared at the monitor helplessly as the officers approached the yard gate, and the hooded figure tilted his head just slightly, as if aware of the camera watching. Then came the final twist. Delgado zoomed the feed. The escorts were not two officers. They were two inmates in uniforms. Someone had swapped positions. Ortega wasn't being escorted. He was already inside. And Hale and Razor were walking directly toward the one man both believed had betrayed them. Cortez ran for the yard door, heart pounding, shouting for backup, for lockdown, for anything. But by the time she reached the gate, it was too late. All three men had met in the center of the yard. Not fighting. Not shouting. Just standing together. Silent. United. As if waiting for something. And that's when Cortez understood. The rivalry had never been real. It had all been orchestrated. Three men. One architect. Years of manipulation. And now, something much bigger was about to begin. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.